Então, vamos dar início à nossa conversa. A gente vai ter 5 apresentações e, no final, bastante espaço para perguntas e respostas. Carolyn, now it's your turn. I would love to invite you to make your presentation. A Carolyn, ela é fundadora do Global Focus on Cancer, e a Carolyn, ela vai falar sobre o tema da apresentação dela é Pessoas com CCNTs tiveram espaço efetivo na construção dos compromissos firmados durante a 4ª reunião de alto nível sobre CCNTs da ONU deste ano, ou foi mais um processo de tokenismo? Carolyn, it's a pleasure to share the floor with you. Please, you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Danny. Bom dia. Obrigado to the organizers for the invitation and for creating space for this very, very important reflection we're having today. So the question I was asked to explore is, quite simple, but quite essential. Did people with lived experience have a real voice in shaping the commitments submitted during the 2025 UN high-level meeting on NCDs and mental health, or was it more symbolic? I think it's a question that matters deeply because participation is not the same as power. And to answer it, I'd like to trace a continuum from the WHO symposiums that laid the foundation to the UN dialogues in June, and then the political declaration negotiated in September. Together, these moments show how lived experience moved from consultation to co-creation, and where we still need to push further to make progress sustainable. So to prepare for the high-level meeting, WHO established the Symposium on Meaningful Engagement of People with Lived Experience, living with NCDs, mental health, and neurological conditions. This wasn't designed in Geneva and then rolled out globally, but co-created. And it built upon previous work, including the 2-year participatory process to develop the WHO framework on meaningful engagement. That involved more, more informal consultations, surveys, focus groups, interviews. I think they had more than 700 people from more than 100 countries in that process. But through an open call, 9 people with lived experience, one from each WHO country, were selected to form a steering committee of 9 lived experience experts. Really, this wasn't this consultation, it was really a shared governance process. We met regularly, designed the symposiums, co-authored papers and concepts, and worked together, not as an external voice, but invited in as a partner to the WHO, shaping process and policy from within. The symposiums were convened through WHO's global coordination mechanism on NCDs, ensuring the process was anchored in WHO formal coordination structures and connected to member states and partners worldwide. And these symposiums were held between May of 2024 and April of 2025, the 3 symposiums. WHO and the Lived Experience Steering Committee convened these 3 global dialogues and symposiums, each building towards institutionalizing meaningful engagement. We first mapped barriers and defined what meaningful engagement should look like. The 2nd symposium in late 2024 refined shared advocacy priorities for the high-level meeting. And the 3rd in April of 2025 was integrated into the WHO Global Coordination Mechanism General Meeting, linking lived experience network directly with member states. It was genuinely multi-sectoral effort involving government representatives, civil society, academia, community advocates, showing that meaningful engagement can connect all parts of the system. From this process, the key advocacy messages developed jointly from the steering committee and the coordination mechanism and the symposium. These messages were more talking points. They were more of a blueprint for embedding meaningful engagement into governance and resting on, kind of 4 pillars. And that was Sorry, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Let's keep going. No, maybe I'm not. Sorry. It's been a long day already. Sorry. These messages, really were more than talking points. And we looked at people who were involved in that came together, priority invitations for individuals who had contributed in the past came through. It really was this global community of practice and meaningful education, looking at our meaningful engagement in NCD and mental health policy. And from the symposiums emerged these co-authored messages, right? The global advocacy protocol embedding this meaningful engagement into the policy and governance, looking at those 4 pillars, addressing barriers, costs, connectivity, language, formalizing and incentivizing through accountability mechanisms, and then investing in the leadership and capacity of people with lived experience to participate in a sustainable way. Acknowledging that, these things need to inform decisions as well. Very important. So it's important to be quite clear. This wasn't the first time people with lived experience spoke at a high-level meeting or participated. In 2011 and in 2018, advocates shared their stories in side events and in civil society forums. But 2025 really marked the first time this engagement was institutionalized, written into the design, the consultation, and the negotiated phases of the UN process itself. And I think that's a pretty crucial distinction. Lived experience wasn't a single voice at the microphone, but it was built into the architecture of how the meeting was organized and how commitments were shaped. They weren't just people being heard, but they were helping to shape the process. All of us were. And again, in June, when the UN convened to formal dialogues on the zero draft, people with lived experience again were in the room, not as observers, but as recognized contributors. And their participation was supported by WHO through the symposium platform and the NCD Alliance, which mobilized civil society to engage directly with the process. WHO was amazing. They helped provide technical briefings and ensured participation was accessible. NCD Alliance helped synthesize feedback and proposed new text for consideration. And what came through the sessions wasn't rhetoric, it was absolutely reality. Advocates spoke about stigma, access to care, and the daily inequities that health systems often overlook. Their testimony grounded the abstract language that often can be in policy into the lived realities of people who are the most affected. And really, for one of the very first times, those voices directly informed the discussions that shaped the draft language debated by member states, moving lived experience from the margins of advocacy to the center of policy dialogue. And when heads of state met in September, the negotiated political declaration reflected a clear shift toward inclusion. Paragraph 18 recognized that people living with NCDs and mental health conditions bring unique expertise to the design and monitoring of policies. In paragraphs 46 to 48, committed countries to co-create rights-based national responses. More than 52 called on WHO to help institutionalize meaningful engagement across implementation and follow-up. And although the declaration was not adopted by consensus, the inclusion of these paragraphs still represents tangible progress, moving from symbolism to structure. And unfortunately, it was embarrassingly my country that really put the stop to this. And it was, even for myself, I felt that I had no place to even go to at the UN because I didn't really have a member state. And I'm apologizing to everyone on behalf of the embarrassment of the United States not joining into this. But so, yes, when we think about this, people with lived experience had a voice, but wasn't enough. The HLM-4 really demonstrated that lived experience can shape the commitments governments debate on the world stage, even in a process that ultimately ended without full consensus. Engagement still remains underfunded, undermeasured, and often dependent on goodwill rather than systems. Many advocates joined on volunteer time without compensation or without adequate compensation or translation support. Digital and language divide still excludes some voices. Meaningful engagement advanced this year through individual effort and shared conviction. The next step is really that we need to ensure that progress is institutionalized, so participation is accepted and expected and not the exceptional. The WHO symposium showed that co-creation can be done. The steering committee demonstrated governance can be shared, and the HLM-4 confirmed that lived experience can shape the commitments governments debate on the world stage. But progress needs permanence. We now need metrics to measure the meaningful engagement, to know when it's working and when it's not. We need funding that treats engagement as essential health infrastructure. And we need to protect civil space so that lived experience voices remained independent and not curated. Because the goal isn't to be included, it's to be indispensable. Again, the fourth high-level meeting proved something important. Meaningful engagement is very much possible, but it is fragile. The WHO symposiums built the framework, the UN dialogues gave it a face and a voice. Our task now is to make that bridge permanent, to move from visibility to influence to accountability. And that work is continuing. WHO is supporting the development of a best practice framework, a guide to help governments, civil society, and organizations like mine strengthen meaningful engagement of people with lived experience in policy and program design. Because ultimately, the true measure of progress isn't how often we're invited to speak, but it's how much of what we say that endures in policy and practice. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I loved what you said about participation is not the same as power. And I fully agree with you and the fact that we need to institutionalize the structure to allow for the meaningful engagement.